Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream tonight with the IOCDF. I am really excited, especially to welcome everyone because this is a brand new live stream, and we are going to be hosting this every other month. OCD 101, back to the basics, getting back to the basics of talking about all things OCD. And this is our first one. And we have two amazing, awesome guests with us tonight that we'll jump in with in just a second. But first, as folks come in, feel free to say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're watching from. And we usually do a fun question in the chat to start, and also with our guests, which I never seem to think of before this moment, which I'm not sure why. But I'm going to go ahead and, you know what? In light of Krista was drinking a really great kind of tea, something. Do you have like a favorite beverage receptacle, a favorite place to put your beverage?
What question is that? I freaking love it.
So yeah, Krista, do you want to tell us about your favorite beverage receptacle?
Well, I mean, this is one of them. So since it's here, the receptacle is present. This was given to me 2 Christmases ago from my 12-year-old son, and it is an elephant and it is yellow. And those are that's my favorite animal, my favorite color. And
I love that.
That's one of my favorite drink receptacles. Great question.
This is why we don't think of them beforehand. Whatever comes out is far more interesting. Jessica, do you have a favorite beverage receptacle?
So, like many, I have a random cup or 9 in front of me at any point. But this year, I'm trying to focus. I got this water bottle from my barber. And just to join the animal theme, there's a tiger that she loves as her symbol. So a tiger and an elephant tonight, holding good water and tea for the audience. How about you, Katie?
I love that. I am, I don't have my coffee. I have a really good coffee one that I don't have up here, but my favorite water one is this, and everyone comments that it actually kind of matches my wall. So I feel like I'm sort of coordinating with my water bottle and my wall. So I feel strong in that. But this is like my safety water bottle. It goes literally everywhere with me. I don't know what to do if I do not have my safety water bottle. This is a large component of my life, as I think for many folks. So as we're jumping in, folks, again in the comments, feel free to say hello. I see Nathan and Laura and Chad and Selwyn and C. Welcome. Feel free to tell us where you're from. And if you would like to enlighten us and tell us about your favorite beverage receptacle, we would love to hear. So as we jump in on a more serious note, or maybe not, welcome to OCD 101, back to the basics. We are so pumped to be here with you. But we do want to note that this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. If you have treatment-related questions, please work with a provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. And really, if you haven't been to this resource, please check it out. I send it to folks each and every day. It is one of my absolute favorites, and it's consistently growing in so many ways. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you are in a crisis or if you're feeling suicidal or unsafe, we encourage you to please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. You can also go to your local emergency room or call 911. And finally, we just want to create a safe and respectful place for everyone. We want to note that this is a community space. We are here talking with one another on the live stream, but you're also talking to one another in the chat. And that in and of itself is beautiful advocacy and support. So as you do that, we ask that you're kind and that you remember that we're here to support one another. And also that the live stream is being broadcast on multiple social media platforms and being recorded. So please keep that in mind as you comment and as you engage with one another. So thank you. And I see Selwyn, I only drink from the same one cup. Yeah, I do too. I need this cup. Stanley style, Chad. Yeah. Coffee mug that says human, which I love that people are jumping into to the beverage receptacle thing. And hi, Spence, and hi, suffering sucks. Suffering does, in fact, it can really suck. So thank you for naming that, even just in your profile name there. So we want you to know that if you are in a space that's challenging, you are seen and heard tonight from our awesome panelists. I am here with the amazing Dr. Jessica Parlor, who is a licensed clinical psychologist located in New York City with more than a decade of experience as a behavioral health professional. Her training includes treatment of anxiety and OCD with children, adults, and families using CBT, ERP, and ACT, as well as family systems and relational theories. Dr. Parlor enjoys working with culturally and clinically diverse populations, and she's passionate about promoting mental wellness and access to quality, inclusive mental health services to traditionally underserved and neglected populations. Dr. Parlor founded her private practice, Embracing Alchemy, in May of 2023 with a goal of supporting behavioral health professionals, which I will just comment is so needed, and she's doing such awesome work. She recently joined Grotto Psychological Solutions in February 2024 to offer psychotherapy services to those seeking treatment for anxiety and OCD. So welcome, Jessica. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Katie. I still remain very passionate about the words and the communities you mentioned. Thank you for having me tonight.
Absolutely. And then we also have the amazing Krista Reed, who I know many of y'all know because she is an IOCDF advocate, and she is a clinical social worker in Wichita, Kansas, and has over 2 decades of social work experience. She specializes in obsessive compulsive disorder, body-focused repetitive behaviors, and body dysmorphic disorder. Krista is passionate about proper OCD treatment, ERP, and ICBT, and formed a local advocacy group, ICT OCD Alliance, in her community in 2021 to assist local individuals to locate specialized therapeutic care. She is also an IOCDF advocate, an individual with lived experience, and a mother of a child with OCD. So she brings so much clinical and personal experience here tonight. Welcome, Krista.
Super excited to be here. Hi. And I got to say a shout out to Val because I see she's there and gotta love Val. So hi, Val.
Hi, Val. We love you. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and jump in. And I think I know most folks in the chat. I always forget to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Katie. This is our new stream. If I have not met anyone here, I'm an ordained minister and interfaith chaplain who works at the intersection of faith and OCD. I also have OCD, and I'm really passionate about sharing my story and making sure that individuals get evidence-based treatment and that they know that they can move forward in their faith communities and engage in treatment at the same time, that all of these things can coexist. But we want to go back to the basics for just a minute, or for really the next 50 minutes or so, and talk about OCD. So I want to throw the question out for just a second of like, what is OCD? That's the initial back to basics question. And Krista, I would love to start with you and just what is it? If you had to explain it to a client for the first time, what is this thing? What is it?
I feel like that's a difficult thing to summarize in such a short amount of time, but I guess that's what I have to do right now. It is a psychological disorder that is part obsessions, which what obsessions are these, I'm going to say a big word. Some of these words are going to be familiar to people, so I'll break it down. And some of them are just going to be like old hat to some people. But these obsessions are ego dystonic, which means that they go outside of who that person is. It's really the opposite. It's kind of like, think of it like a photographic negative of their real self. And it's going to go against their values. It's going to go against so many parts of their being, but they're going to continuously have these repetitive and wanted thoughts over and over and over in their mind. And those are obsessions. And then we're going to have compulsions. And what compulsions are, is kind of, it has 2 goals. One is to bring down the distress that the obsessions bring. And the other is to ensure that like the bad thing isn't going to happen. And these are going to be purposeful acts or mental acts that the individual is going to do, like I just mentioned, in regards to the obsessions. These individuals, just diagnostically speaking, they will comprise of these obsessions and compulsions more than an hour a day. we're going to see a significant amount of impairment and distress. And we're going to get more into this as we go on. But one thing that I think more than anything that I want to just emphasize, what is OCD? OCD is awful.
I'm so glad that you named that, even just from a human perspective. It's just, I think we can talk about it in all of these clinical terms. And at the end of the day, it's like, ugh, right? It's just like a visceral, it just sucks. There's no way to say it other than it just sucks, especially when you're in it. Jessica, I'd love to ask you too. Krista did such a beautiful job explaining, but I always love to ask folks different definitions because I think everyone explains it to clients in slightly different ways, especially when they show up for the first time. So somebody was coming in and they were like, oh, Dr. Parlor, what is OCD? I don't know. What would you say to them?
I think, yes, Krista, I really appreciated too the way you shared, right? The passion. And I like when we integrate the clinical because OCD is so unique where it does start to hijack some of your sophisticated thinking. So it's nice when the clinicians can kind of merge it together and have people feel like we know what they're talking about. So being that I don't have lived experience, the thing that I listen for is, just as Krista said, as you've talked about before, Katie, feeling so terrible, trying to control yourself. And what I listen for my patients, as soon as they hit that, it didn't feel right. That is when all my compassion just comes running forward because that's what we're trying to do. Feel good, feel healthy, live life, exist. And for me, OCD shows up and doesn't allow my patients to feel good and feel right in existing. So that's how I start to describe and try to form an alliance with people when they walk in.
Thank you, Jessica. And on everything that we're mentioning kind of on the human side and connecting with patients and forming an alliance, I'm curious, Jessica, what made you want to get into work around OCD? What prompted that for you to begin with?
There's so many people that have heard this story out of convention or 3, so you get me excited.
Okay, we're back to the basics.
That's right, we are back to the basics. I actually was introduced to IOCDF as a trainee, an intern at Dr. Jenny Yip's clinic in Los Angeles. So I really, really fell in love with the courageous and brave patients that came in to address OCD, anxiety, phobia, all of these presentations where their lives have been so severely disrupted. And I literally did that my first internship and have never left the community. I've already graduated. I have my own practice. I'm in New York, and I continue to get more and more involved. I believe that OCD spares no one. And so IOCDF is so committed to working with diverse communities and making sure that accessibility for quality care is available, and that aligns with my goals. And so I will be here. Same as you, Katie. Same as Krista.
No, I love that. And again, I just, I always think I love hearing from so many professionals like, oh, I was in this training and then I never left OCD work because I just fell in love with that and the people and just all of the things. So no, thank you for that, Jessica. And Krista, I want to ask you, I know your trajectory is a little bit different with your lived experience, and just why OCD? How did you get into this work?
Yeah, kind of like Jessica. I was thinking that, oh boy, I've told this story so many times. However, it's not like I told everybody. Unfortunately, I feel like my story happens far too often. So I started out as a therapist in 2008. And I actually was specializing in infant mental health and trauma. And during that time was really battling some pretty upsetting OCD stuff and could not for the life of me find help. And then in 2016, I kind of just got fed up because I was going back and forth from therapist to therapist and not finding anybody. And I kind of just had to throw a middle finger in the air and just say, I'm going to do this. And I picked up a book was actually a children's workbook, to be honest with you, because I was working with kids at this time. And I figured I'm going to work on becoming an OCD specialist and learning as much as I can. I remember taking so many courses through the IOCDF, through the Beck Institute, through Mass General, and so many places just to get as much knowledge as I possibly can. Because not only was I wanting to convert my entire practice into doing OCD, I desperately needed help. So unfortunately, I am one of those people that never got the proper help. However, I'm doing so much better now because I have had not only just my clinical skills have been really significant to me, but I really attribute my own recovery to this community.
Yeah. Thank you, Krista. And just so powerful. And I see Val saying, thank you for your service and commitment. And I think so many of us here really attribute recovery and moving forward with life to this community. And I always say, I feel just like Krista and Jessica, where I'm like, well, I've said this so many times, but we're at a back to the basics thing. So I'm going to say it again. I mean, if you would have asked me in 2018 or 2019, was there even hope for living a life? Like, I didn't think I would be here. And I was the academy chaplain at a large private school. I looked like I had it all together. I was suffering like that we were. I mean, I hated every aspect of myself and my intrusive thoughts. I thought I was a harmful person. I thought I had secretly done all of these things and somehow all of the really intense intrusive thoughts. And treatment saved my life, and connecting with folks through the IOCDF saved my life. I found my spouse through the IOCDF. I found, just so many friends and, but very much like these incredible humans I'm with here, when I started getting to know the treatment side, I wanted to devote my life to that. And the faith side too, to let folks know you really can. You can get better. Like, you can engage in treatment and still connect with your faith, your culture, your family, your identity, and engage in treatment. You can do these things. So it's such an honor. And I love how we are all so passionate about this work. And in kind of getting back to the basics, Kat, OCD as a child was pretty intense and no one saw it that way. Now that I'm older, I recognize what it was. Yeah, I think so many of us, I look back to memories when I was like 8 and think, how did nobody know? Right? Like, how did nobody have any idea that when I came home from kindergarten and said, what if I hurt somebody at school today by accident? How did nobody know that was OCD, So Krista, I want to stay with you for a second because you started to mention breaking down obsessions and compulsions, but I want to break it down a lot for folks to hear, what's an obsession? What's a compulsion? How do they differ? How do we pull them apart? What is that?
Do you want me to do obsessions and Jessica do compulsions? So I
think that's great. Let's do that.
Cool, man. Okay. Well, obsessions will get super clinical. I mean, I don't have anything in front of me, so this is by memory. So if I'm thinking about how the DSM defines it as unwanted, repetitive thoughts that are going to be outside of who that person is. Sometimes they can be violent, they can be disgusting, they could be sexual. One of the words that we hear very frequently, and this is actually quoting the DSM. So one of the things that we actually hear frequently is intrusive thoughts. But how the DSM defines it is experiencing intrusive thoughts. And that's a really important thing to remember because every single person every single person has intrusive thoughts. The difference is individuals with OCD have those intrusive thoughts and how they're experiencing them, they're feeling them, and it's seeming is so different. It's literally this glitch that is happening in the brain. And the best way I can really describe it, it's like the key is in the ignition. You just went down to get your car checked and everything. And the mechanic is like, you're good to go, but it just won't turn. It's turning for everybody else, but it just won't turn. There's some type of a glitch. And so those obsessions occur over and over and over again. And so when these individuals are having these intrusive thoughts, like we all do, it just is experienced so much deeper.
Thank you. I love that analogy too. I really do. And normalizing that intrusive thoughts, it really is the way that individuals with OCD experiences them. It's not that other people don't experience intrusive thoughts, because we all have thoughts that are random and whatever throughout the day. But for folks with OCD, it's sticky and we're really, really stuck on particular things. C, thank you for that question. We're going to, I wanted to let folks know, please put any questions you have in the chat, because we're going to get to those in just a second. So we will definitely get to that. And Chad, so glad that you're watching with your daughter too. Welcome. Jessica, so what are compulsions, and like, how do they even stem from these obsessions when that key is kind of stuck in the ignition?
Well, and I really like how Krista highlighted that experiencing. I'll be using that in treatment this week, right? The way you're experiencing, right? These intrusive thoughts, because they're so unwanted, they often come with negative emotions, right? So that's the thing. They're intrusive, you're experiencing them in a way that other people don't. They're repetitive, and they're bringing negative emotion, which is discomfort. And then that builds, right? And then we got some distress going on. The human is always going to try to feel better. So the compulsions come along to counteract, right? The obsessions, literally make them go away, make them stop, just make it stop. This is when we hear about rituals, right? When we hear about repetitive behaviors in response to the intrusive thought. And as we know, the relief is temporary, often temporary. And then, as we know, things can grow, the behaviors can become more extreme, more disruptive, and more impairing the compulsions in response to the obsessions. So those intrusive thoughts take a toll, negative experience, and the compulsions come along to help provide some relief, but the relief is often temporary. And sometimes the compulsions do not appear to meaningfully or relevantly address what the person is saying that they're concerned about in any sort of way that would solve it. So this is really, I mean, for me, my heart always breaks when I hear about the amount of time being engaged with some of the compulsions and some of the more extreme measures and consequences that come from some of the compulsions.
No, thank you. And it's so painful, and it takes away life. And I think, you know, what we're highlighting, it seems to the person in that moment, I'll say it seemed to me like that at every moment of, oh, I'm protecting everything I care about, or, oh, I have to do this in order to get relief, or to protect my loved ones, or to do this or to do that. And the reality is we're handing our life over to OCD each time we kind of keep engaging in those compulsions. And Jessica, you mentioned some of the kind of emotions or the discomfort that comes up. I wonder, can you talk more about discomfort? Because I think a lot of times we assume anxiety, which yes, but I think there's a lot of forms discomfort can take. So can you share with folks what that might look like?
Yes, I mean, I think people try to manage the anxiety when it's the guilt, the shame, the disgust, right? I don't want to pull out my feelings pillow that's always so close to me here in the office, but those are the sorts of complex, negative emotions and emotion states that tend to override. For me, most critical in making space for in treatment is that guilt and the shame. And because OCD really thrives, right, on that, and starts, we already have a question, right, talking about disclosing. And sometimes some of the behaviors, the repetitive behaviors, or even the nature of the thoughts, as Krista shared, brings so much guilt, shame, fear, disgust, right, anger, you name it, that it becomes difficult. And then the person suffers on top of the symptoms. And the distress that it's bringing, discomfort. And then I say discomfort that lingers is opening up that avenue for distress. And then that's when I need humans to know that we can help.
I love that discomfort that lingers, opening up the avenue for distress. Wow, that's really powerful. And love, again, that you highlighted beyond just the anxiety. And I'll say for me, it was always the guilt and the shame and but I am stuck here, and how can I get out of this place? I love what Spence Robert said in the chat. Compulsions are like poison ivy. It feels good to scratch, but scratching makes it so much worse. Yes. So true. It's like for a second, and then it's like, wait, and now it's all over my entire arm. What's going on? Krista, I'd love to hear from you. We started to talk about this kind of guilt, fear, anxiety, different types of discomfort, but I want to talk more about shame and how does shame maybe keep OCD going for folks? That's a big question.
Is a big question. Oh boy. And you going like Jessica going through all of those. And I was even just kind of like thinking about not just myself, but my clients that that is the one that it seems like we as a community, we talk about it all the time, but it never feels like it's enough that we're talking about it because it's so significant. And it's stuff like that that makes me think as to why it's no longer seen to be an anxiety disorder, because there's a lot of people that will say, well, yeah, I'm anxious, but that's not my primary emotion. Sometimes it's also disgust. And I mean, that's one that I don't think it's talked about enough, but I know we're here to talk about shame. Shame is an interesting thing because it's also, unfortunately, very motivating. And OCD knows that. And it knows that it's really just getting your goat. It's just, So like, for instance, like, let's say if I am, and Kate, I'm going to kind of use your whole faith thing as like an example or whatever. Okay. So let's say I am very much into my religion, very much into my faith, and my OCD is going to attack that. And if I feel like I don't do the compulsion, then I'm not meeting up to the standards and the expectations of my faith. And my faith is something that is incredibly important to me. And if I don't meet the expectations and standards of my faith, then what kind of person am I? What does that say about me? And that is such deep-rooted shame. Because when it comes down to OCD is telling us you might be this, you could be this. It's really trying to convince us all of this terrible things that could be about us. And it is so deeply rooted in shame. And this is what makes it so convincing, because the unfortunate thing about shame is, and another thing I don't think people talk about, is not only can it be motivated for the negative, but it can be motivated for a positive way. Like if I need to be held accountable on something and somebody is going to contact me and say, hey, Krista, did you finish this thing? Oh, no. I feel a little bit of shame, but not nearly to the extent that it's going to spiral me by any means. But the spiraling piece, that's exactly the type of shame that OCD has. And one of the things that I say in my practice, and I even say on my social media, is stigma and shame die where communication and validation live. The more we have these discussions, the more we validate other people's experiences and emotions and situations and just their life. Stop giving people advice. Stop telling them unwarranted things. Just sitting and listening. Can you imagine the amount of shame that we can completely extinguish from that? Girl, I can get on a soapbox about this, so I should probably stop.
It is a good soapbox. I was like, ooh, let's talk about shame. Krista's going to want to talk about this.
That's like dying over there.
It's like, no, but this is so important. And again, I mean, I think about when I was struggling first, I can't, there weren't necessarily really a lot of these IOCDF live streams started during COVID. And I think about at the height of my struggles, there wasn't a lot of this. And I remember like searching for things around people feeling shame because I thought I was the worst. I don't even know that I had a name for it. I just thought I was this horrible, awful person all by myself. And I think for people to hear, you are not alone in feeling these things. And we're not trying to fix, we're here for you. We see you, we validate you right now. So wherever y'all are, like we see you. And I think, I want to, with this shame piece, I think this also loops back into themes around OCD. And I think there's a larger conversation here, but I want to talk about when we say OCD themes or OCD subtypes or types of OCD. Jessica, what do we mean by this?
What the OCD has decided to amplify, exaggerate, and magnify as the only filter with which you can navigate and see the world. No, I mean, I hear it because I always tell my patients, like, I will fight your OCD in my office. I have no problem with that because I'm taking care of my patients, right? But that's exactly, and I know we know some of the more common, right? Contamination. I would love, Katie, the scrupulosity. When Krista, when you were talking about the shame part, that example is so powerful. And then now, in general, the shame can just attach to anything. It just starts to show up all over in that space. But yes, we have contamination, subtype, scrupulosity, the morals, we have harm OCD, which breaks my heart when people are so concerned that they're out there being actual threats to humanity and maybe doing things that they're not even aware of later. We do have the more violent and aggressive, right? And I just want to speak to that because I do believe OCD wants people to hide behind, oh my gosh, you can't tell anybody that you just thought this. And I want you to know, a quality trained clinician, people that are part of the community at IOCDF can tolerate hearing your violent and aggressive, right, obsessions, and will offer you space and grace and lots of compassion, because we know that you're being most disturbed by having that thought, even as the rest of us tend to remain safe around you. Those are the ones that tend to jump out like immediately for me. And then also in my child work, a lot more perfectionism, symmetry, right? These sorts of things that come up. But my heart and most of my caseload is absolutely on scrupulosity and a lot of contamination, which is just incredibly disruptive to trying to get anything done.
And I love that you meant it really can. I mean, it can show up in any possible way that you can imagine. OCD is really only limited by our imagination. So, well, even with scrupulosity, I mean, there's like, I can't even tell you the amount of things that I have seen where things are spiritually contaminated to someone, where I can't touch this thing, or I can't say this word. If I say this word, it reminds me of this thing where God might be mad at me. I mean, any possible thing that you can imagine. And I always say it's because folks with OCD are awesome and creative, and OCD happens to hijack that creativity and use it in really kind of twisted ways. But at the end of the day, OCD is really nasty ice cream that happens to show up in a lot of really different, gross, artificial flavors. But it's all just kind of the same nasty OCD. But I do think, when we talk about themes or subtypes of OCD, I would say it matters. It makes a difference, not always in the form of treatment, but definitely in the form of shame, in the form of people finding community. And Krista, I know shame is that's so significant to you. I'd love to hear, like, why do we even talk about themes? Like, what's the point of that?
Well, for one, just on a clinical scale, I think it just makes it a lot easier for us clinicians to compartmentalize the kinds of obsessions the person's having. Because one of the questions I get, particularly from families, will say, well, how many obsessions are there? And I say, infinite. And so when we're talking about subtypes, every time I always find one client that doesn't quite fit in perfectly with like a subtype. And I'm like, well, to be honest with you, that's because, again, obsessions are so infinite. And when you're talking about shame, I mean, the one that just comes up to my head anytime I hear about shame and subtypes is, I'll just say it, pedophilia OCD. That is the one that time and time again, we hear just being massively debilitating across the board. And to be honest with you, that's even one that I hear even within our own community, there's a lot of stigma. I feel very blessed in the fact that at the conference in San Francisco a couple years ago, I got to do a presentation on POCD. And after that presentation, I had a significant amount of people coming up to me, not asking me questions, but just to thank me and the other presenters, not just me, it's not just about me, but the other presenters, to say thank you so much for having this as an in-person, because this is part of defeating the shame that we experience. Because my understanding is when it comes to particular themes like that, and within faith, I'd put faith sometimes really high up there for a lot of people as well. There really is no hierarchy, let's be real. When we have these discussions in person, it really allows the people to say, not only do I see you, but I hear you and I'm here for you. And your story matters. We don't have to have this discussion online. You can be around other like-minded people and other amazingly, beautifully empathetic people in person. And guess what? I'm never going to judge you. And that is such a strong, strong message. And we need to have more people doing some of these in-person stuff with like these taboo, shameful type topics.
Thank you for that, Krista. And thank you for naming pedophilia, OCD, POCD, that I think people just hearing that are like, okay, I'm not alone. And I navigated POCD at different points, even working in schools, and thought, well, what will people think of me? Like, how can I even bring that up? How can I even mention that? So I want to also, just along this theme topic, and then I'm going to shift into some questions that our awesome viewers have posed for us. But we often say that OCD latches on to the things that people care about most, or kind of attacks their values. And I'll throw this out to either Jessica or Krista, whoever wants to jump in, because it's an interesting and I think kind of a tricky question that I always have trouble answering, of why does it happen to attach to things that people care about the most? Why does it always end up being that one thing that they don't want to be worried about?
I'll answer this.
Yeah.
Okay. It's because you care about it. It's because you love it. It's important to you. You know, I kind of, this might be a shocker, but I like to joke around with my clients, and imagine that. And I'll say, okay, so think of something that you could not give like two craps about. And we'll just be like really silly or whatever. And they might say something like a baseball team or whatever. Like if they're like a huge, I don't know, Red Sox fan, and they're like, well, I don't care about the Yankees. And I'm like, how would you feel if your OCD all of a sudden was be like, oh my gosh, if you did this one thing, the Yankees are going to suck this year. They're going to be like, well, I'm going to do that thing over and over again because I want them to suck. I'm like, that's exactly why your OCD is not attacking that, because that's not important to you. And I say, okay, so your OCD is attacking, you know, whether or not you're going to harm your children. I'm going to go ahead and waver that those kids are probably really important to you. And they're like, exactly. So one of the things I will do early on is kind of flip the script. And I realize that some people might see this as being reassurance-y from a therapist, but I'm going to explain why it's not. One, my client is not asking me for this particular reassurance. And I see this as a way to disseminate any kind of shame. And also it's very rapport building. So if somebody were to come to me and say, my obsession is, I'm afraid that I'm going to harm my kids, I will say, so you know what that is telling me? Because OCD is attaching onto our values, you must be an amazing parent. Gosh, you must be, your kids are so lucky to have you. And every time the person either cries or smiles or are just in shock, because especially from a therapist, they have never gotten that. They have either had a therapist afraid of them, which is making me sick to say, but it happens all the time, or reassure them like, this is crazy, you're not going to hurt your kids. But for me to say, man, your kids are so lucky to have you. Your OCD is trying to sabotage that relationship. Can I help you to maybe sabotage OCD instead of the other way around? And that can be a really cool motivating thing. So why do we have the obsessions we have? It's because you care about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Krista. And yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I hear all the time, and I'll say for me, I said all the time, I could literally let anything go, just not this one. Like anything else, this is the one thing I can't, let go. And it's like, well, that's why we're still stuck on it, right? It's the thing that's literally the most important to us, and that can differ for each and every person. And that's, I think, what makes it such a painful disorder. But I'm glad that we're talking about this and talking about the shame here, and hopefully for folks watching, helping you to feel seen. And I want to jump over to some of our questions here, and I want to go to C at 721. Any tips on how to share a diagnosis with a family member, especially one that might not get it at first? And first of all, thank you for asking this. I think it's super brave, and I know that it can be really hard to disclose. And I want to throw this over to Jessica for any feedback that you might have here.
Yes. I mean, my first, right, if I was working with this person is, the desire to share, disclose, like all the different language. I help facilitate a helping professionals with OCD group. And so this is a very common topic about sharing and the desire to share. And, I first want to know, is there like urge, pressure, need to share confession energy? I want to assess for that and appreciate that. But as far as like tips, if the person feels ready to share, feels like there may or may not be support, and just may feel empowered, right? To exist fully as they are right now. I would encourage to use statements that very clearly, because I'm big on, you get to have your journey in this life, okay? And you get to express what you're experiencing during that journey. And I think it's reasonable to expect people to receive you clearly articulate where you are in that space. So I always practice with my patients. I say statements that sound like affirmations, right? And you affirm to yourself first, right? I am in recovery. I am participating in treatment to manage my symptoms or the symptoms of OCD. I understand them to be XYZ. I can be best supported in this way if you feel like you're possible. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you just for giving people, I don't know, permission to take up space and to be them, because that's right. I think for folks with OCD, especially, I hear so many people try to make themselves really small. And it's like, well, I have this thing. It's not that big of a deal. Don't worry. It's like, no, you're allowed to take up space and talk about your journey. And I love even saying those affirmations out loud as statements, as you're sharing, even for you. Beautiful. And naming what you need. So Krista, I'd love anything you'd like to add to this. And I'd also like to ask, like, if we're sharing with a family member or for the first time, or I often get the question, I'm going to share with a religious leader for the first time. Does this mean that we have to share all of the content of our intrusive thoughts? So I'm curious kind of what you think about that and any other tips.
I'm right there with Jessica in the fact that anytime I incorporate family, which by the way is like 99% of the time, I have a very family-centered practice. And part of that is, well, it's all of it, is because when you are working with OCD and to put the entire treatment onto that client, like how much are you really actually expecting them to get better? I really kind of base my practice very similar to the model that is used for addictions. Addictions have so much education, so much family support, so much family education. And it's a really good model to actually utilize therapeutically. But just thinking about this from like a pediatric lens about how to talk to a family member who doesn't necessarily get it, I will still meet with my client beforehand to prepare the family meeting. Especially, let's say I have like a teenager, and it's really common that teenagers do not either some of them don't want at least one of the parent in there. They might be okay with another one. And then sometimes they're very just like, are you going to tell them what is on my mind? Like, no, you get to share whatever you want to share. And I absolutely, till this day, have clients who are pretty close to be completely done with therapy that have never told their parents what their obsessions are. And I leave that up to them. And I also let them know that, this is part of their own recovery. They're welcome to share this with anybody. They share it with me. We're able to work through it. That's fine. Hopefully when they get older, they'll be able to process it a little bit more. However, that just takes it up just to another step of vulnerability. And we'll even discuss, okay, so let's even talk about what might happen if you do share this. Because some of that is also potentially obsessive. Are you concerned that your family member is not going to get it? Is that in the reality, or is that living in the OCD? And that's something that you have to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Kristen. I can feel your, especially your pediatric clients are really lucky to have you kind of walking through that with them. So just thank you. And see, I hope this was helpful for you in your question. I want to jump to Kyle at 728. And if anybody else wants to speak to this also, but I feel really passionately about this question. I'll be graduating from seminary to be a pastor in the ELCA. I got diagnosed 1 year ago, and OCD has made school hard. My question is about when and if I should start ERP, CBT treatment. I've had debilitating OCD, but it hasn't been debilitating for about 1.5 years. So I'm not sure if I should start treatment. I still have rumination, but nothing really bad for a good amount of time. So I'm curious what other folks think. I want to name for me, first of all, Kyle, congratulations on getting ready to graduate from seminary. That's awesome and such a big deal. And your story speaks so much to my own, because my OCD started to really ramp up in seminary. And a big chunk of my story was actually me being told by my denomination not to get help, because and that was a different time. The ELCA is awesome with mental health. So I'm so glad that you're in that space. But for me, there was a time when I was asked to not get treatment or support, and I shoved it down, and I lied on my psych evaluations, and I did all of these different things. And when I got into ministry, it kind of ended up exploding for me in some really challenging ways. And we know OCD latches onto what's the most important to us. I was working in educational chaplaincy with thousands of kiddos, and OCD latched onto all of it. And treatment ultimately saved my life, and I think helped me to become a better minister and a better chaplain, and to more fully live out my faith and my vocation. And I always tell folks who are going into ministry or any helping profession, or really at all, even if it's kind of up and down, maybe not bothering you right now, if you haven't sought treatment, it's always a good time, especially when it's not exploding, because you are going to be so thankful when you get into ministry that you've done that. And it's also going to give you skills and tools to be an even better minister as you serve people. So I don't know, Krista or Jessica, if you want to speak to that at all too.
I mean, you crushed it. So I don't know if there's any more to say. I just say, hey, if you got motivation to go to therapy, go.
Yeah, do it.
Yes to both of those. I'm like, everybody deserves good care. You do not need to be impaired. You wouldn't believe we want to support people in wellness and well-being. And that can be done at any time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have to be sick, right?
And something else to keep in mind about OCD is OCD can wax and wane. Like if it's untreated OCD, yeah, you might be doing okay now. How long? Because OCD, from what we know, is a chronic condition, and something later on could trigger an episode. And yeah, if you can get in right now, get some tools, get some education, get some support before that. Think about all that amazing, like preventative stuff that you can get. Ah, man. I mean, you're going to crush recovery if that's the way you're going to go.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And Kyle's serious offer, please send me an email, and I can make sure my email's in here after. I would love to connect with you on what that looks like in ministry and getting support and treatment. And selfishly, I always like to connect with ministers who are passionate about this work and get them involved. So maybe be careful emailing me too, because you might end up on some task forces. But would love to chat with you. I want to go down to Laura at 7:36. Can you give an overview on how trauma can impact OCD? Any intersections between OCD and trauma? I'll throw this out either. Whoever wants to jump in, Krista or Jessica. I know this is a big question and also an important question.
So I'm going to say yes, right? Like, absolutely. And a little too much of a relationship, right? From the clinical end on my side, right? And this is where we really want you with a quality clinician that can be able to appreciate the symptoms that are presenting and where they're coming from, because the treatment sometimes where the relief is going to be found and the actual sustainable improvements might be a little bit nuanced. So like I would say I can't give like just an overview, right, in general, but we do know that there are certain times in life, crisis situations, even diagnoses, conditions that can trigger OCD. And in some cases, unfortunately, overnight, right? The ones that are coming to mind, just in my caseload in particular, are postpartum. And let me be candid, pregnancy, okay? Because we can still do so much more research and appreciating and understanding what's going on. Pregnancy, any sort of life transitions. And then in particular, I uniquely serve a caseload where I do address women who have trauma history that represent diverse communities that are struggling with OCD. And I can tell you, once we understand and can appreciate the trauma events that have occurred, as well as me appreciating the presentation of OCD, I can see where they interact. They'll overlap sometimes, and then sometimes they're starkly different. And I need to be prepared and have my patient appreciate the psychoeducation. So yes, they do. Quality clinician, right? Well trained in OCD and appreciating that, and really mapping the best treatment plan for relief and support.
Thank you. No, and there's some amazing, amazing research out there right now, and there's emerging research around trauma and OCD, and specifically PTSD and CPTSD, and even moral injury and veterans in OCD. I mean, there's so many different things. My passion on the scrupulosity side is a big overlap between scrupulosity and religious trauma or adverse religious experiences or spiritual abuse. And we're actually coming out, depending on IRB approval, hopefully in the next month, with a survey around religious trauma and OCD and scrupulosity to try to really better understand this connection and where do people need treatment and support for trauma and OCD, and where might there be stuck points with OCD treatment if there's been religious trauma. So I think there's so much work that needs to be done, but Laura, I'm so glad that you brought this up because there is a connection. I want to make sure, Krista, do you have anything that you want to add here?
I waited for Jessica to go first because this is such a heavy topic, and so I'm glad she did. It's very interesting because we also know that a traumatic experience, big T or little t, can be the moment that wakes OCD up. And then an individual's themes can kind of go off of that. We can see that. And we also know that not everybody with OCD has PTSD. However, I'm so nervous to bring out like a statistic because somebody might come back and be like, that's not it, but I'm gonna say it anyways. But
Exposure time, Krista. Put it out there.
Well, I just know some people can be called out. So please, I guess, call me out. But I also just want to emphasize that I think it's roughly around 25% of individuals with OCD also have a PTSD diagnosis, which is a really high comorbidity. And we have to realize that not all OCD therapists treat trauma and not all trauma therapists treat OCD. And so it's going to be a really common thing that sometimes an individual with OCD is also simultaneously doing trauma treatment. And it's kind of like a little game of ping pong that we have to play with different kinds of specialists. But when working with trauma, we just have to triage and we have to figure out what is going to be the best. So an overview, whew, man, I hope that that's a back to basic thing that Katie eventually does, because that's like a 17-hour discussion.
Yeah, Laura, we are adding this to our list of topics, and just thank you for bringing it up, and Krista and Jessica, thank you for addressing this. I want to go to Zach at 743, who says, any tips for how to handle lapses? I feel filled with guilt and depressed after I avoid something that I did a lot of exposures to feel better about. And first, Zach, I'm so sorry. And I always want to say a lapse is not a relapse, like over and over again. Our lapse is not a relapse. There are so many ups and downs. And I have experienced quite a few little lapses this year, and will say have felt, or in the last year, and have felt all sorts of things about myself, and have felt guilty and depressed. And well, I work in OCD, so why is this happening? And why aren't I using my skills and tools? And I worked so hard at this. And my biggest advice would be self-compassion, self-compassion, self-compassion. It's OCD can be up and down. And I want you to know that as much as OCD in a lapse makes you feel like you're back at the start, you're not. You cannot unlearn all of these awesome skills and tools that you've worked so hard to develop. And for me, it's always, how can I be compassionate with myself without being satisfied? How can I say, oh, I have OCD and this sucks and this is so hard, and it's okay that I'm experiencing a lapse. And I also care enough about myself that I'm going to step forward differently tomorrow and maybe not do that compulsion or do it a little bit less. But I want to just let you know that you are not alone in that. And oh my goodness, you are not doing anything wrong, and you can step forward. Krista, anything to add even from your own experience about this? Because I think we all experience freaking lapses. It's hard.
I was going to say two things, and you took one of them, self-compassion. Absolutely. Absolutely. And with self-compassion also comes this line of acceptance. And I know I already mentioned this, but OCD is chronic. And that's one of the things I talk about with every single one of my clients is when you're dealing with a chronic condition, you are going to have a moment where you just don't feel good. And that is never going to be your fault. Absolutely not. If we're thinking about an individual that maybe has like a chronic pain, there's going to be times that maybe the pain is not as severe, but there's going to be times that they may be just laid out. That is not because they didn't do their exercises or didn't do whatever protocol it was. That's because they're an individual with chronic condition. And so using some of these self-compassion techniques for anybody with or without OCD, to be honest with you, I think just allows you to accept the human experience, quite frankly. And then the second thing I want to say is, always reach out to your therapist for a booster session. There's absolutely no shame in that. I'll have clients that I haven't seen for a couple years and be like, hey, I just kind of want to re-up, process some things, like touch base. Because also one thing my clients know about is research is always ongoing. And sometimes they just want to come in and be like, okay, so do you have any new things? Like, is there any new things I can help? Like I can do? Are there new books? And they really genuinely like to have a part of this conversation because these boosters have really become part of their lapse prevention strategies as well. I guess I'd not say lapse prevention, but relapse prevention. Why did I not think of that? That's literally the RP of E. Wow.
That's okay. No, we're getting it. And I'm watching. We are gonna get through all the questions tonight, y'all. So Nathan, I don't know if I missed your question because I think I've hit all the questions. So re-put it at the bottom if I missed it, because I'm gonna get to the last two that I see, and if I missed it, I'm gonna come back to yours again. So sorry, Emilio, behind the scenes. I just want to make sure we hit everybody's questions. So I see at I just lost it. Going down to the bottom. Oh, Carrie at 744. How can a parent help an older teen's mind to consider an IOP over the summer when the teen is home? Teen is fearful of daily ERP. Any suggestions? Jessica, any suggestions on this?
I mean, I'm actually going to get, because Krista's working actively with the adolescents. I'm like, Krista, what's your sell for summer camp 2025?
What?
When the teen's home, how do we get them to want to go to consider IOP?
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, I'm in a state that doesn't have an IOP, so that's not even an option. So I really don't have an answer for that, to be honest with you. I was actually just Googling real quick because I was like, oh, what is that book? What is that book? Alec Pollard's book might be a pretty good one for you to check out. It's called When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment. And it might be beneficial and just even give you some tips with this. Another book that you might consider is the one that is in regards to space treatment, which that book is also escaping my brain. Give me a second. I'm going to check that out. You got to forgive me. I've had a lot of meetings and clients today. The brain is starting to shut off.
I was going to say, if there's no IOP, are there still resistance? The conference is like a mini dose of in-person, lots of not just clinicians, but like community and encouragement, and everybody's like really supportive. So, I mean, I know that's what a lot of different groups, they definitely use the conference as an opportunity to participate in a bigger treatment and push maybe some of those goals.
Yeah, and I always encourage, we just had it, but OCD camp going as a whole family can be a really great virtual opportunity for teens to connect with others. It's so much fun. Oh my goodness, so much fun. Of course, any IOCDF event, I love Krista mentioned space, doing space training for parents in any way, shape, or form, I think can be really helpful in just skills and tools with your teen. But I think also opening their mind, I might be biased, but I think a lot of IOCDF kind of events, even just like this, are really inclusive and kind of create a safe space to see real human beings talking about treatment. So if there is any openness, would always love to have you and your teen even pop onto one of these live events and they can ask us a question directly and we can chat about it because I want them to know that they're not alone too.
I found the book. Can I say
okay.
it?
Yeah, go ahead. I was stalling until you found it, but go ahead. Yeah.
I've read it. I recommend it all the time, but all I can ever think about is anytime I ever talk about it, I just want to tell people it's the Teal book. Like, just Google the Teal book and that's going to be their answer. It's ridiculous. My brain, how it is sometimes. Okay. So it's Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD by Ellie Leibovitz. And it really focuses heavily on parental intervention when a child or a teen is really struggling to do anxiety or OCD treatments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think one of our last questions here, and then we're finishing up, was Bradley at 751. How can people learn what they need help with and how to ask for it? OCD attacks my work, school, money, social skills, and more, but I don't know how others can support recovery efforts. Any thoughts on this?
I'm not sure if there's a quality clinician on board, because my heart goes out, Bradley, when I hear that word attack still being, used as the experience with OCD. So we definitely want to get you to quality care. I don't want you struggling to know what you need help with on your own. You're already trying to survive, existing under that kind of duress. And then this community, and I'm going to tell you, we have on the website for IOCDF, there's a list of all these different topics and themes that communities have been formed around. There's communities formed in your local area, and all you have to do is mention where you are. And this community is so supportive, people will try to connect with you if there's not anyone close by. So I would say like two-part, right? I believe a lot of things are therapeutic. So community is a huge part of recovery, and then quality clinical care around that. And just for you to not be alone with this, Bradley. It's already a lot to manage alone. And we're grateful that you're even here tonight.
Thank you, Bradley. We're so glad you're here and in community, and just want you to know, again, you are so not alone. I think for so many of us, OCD, again, attacks the things that we care about the most. And I think even you being here tonight and saying, okay, how do I ask for help, is such a first step in asking for help. And again, want to offer, as I did earlier, if you want to continue the conversation of how to plug in with the IOCDF or get resources, please feel free to reach out afterward, and happy to continue that too. Krista, I feel like, Krista, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I was just honestly just reflecting what Jessica said. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to put it, is, OCD is such an isolating disorder. And I've heard so many clinicians say this, and I'm sure the both of you can agree. I've even had clients who have struggled to date. And I'm like, oh God, if you only knew this other client, you guys would just love each other so much. Obviously we can't, but
I have that INST group work all the time on the chaplaincy side. I'm like, I wish I could let you know that this other person experienced.
My 9 o'clock would love my 2 o'clock, but it's like, you can't do that. But if you could find any kind of support group, any kind of network, anything, they're all on the IOCDF website. Do it. It might seem really intimidating and scary to put yourself out there at first, but I am completely living proof that I'm a person that did put myself out there, and I have made some of the best friends I've ever made in my entire life through this community. And so taking that first step is hard, but you will never, after that first step, going to have to take that second or third one alone.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I think I hit on everything with a question mark. I know we didn't get to all comments, but I think I hit on all questions. And I think, Nathan, you were talking about the guilt, shame, and stigma piece. I so echo what Alex was saying in the chat, that there is no one way that OCD can make you feel. It's okay if guilt and shame are not those primary pieces for you. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's disgust, maybe you're looking for something to feel just right. And that is just as painful. So I want you to know, whatever your experience is with that, like, we want to validate that and let you know that you are not alone and that there is hope. So I hope you all felt the hope and the love tonight. We are a little bit over, but I at least want to go. Krista, any final words of hope for our crew tonight?
Yes, I actually looked up a quote. Don't ask me who it's from, because I don't know. Oh my gosh, the quote just went away. Yeah, it came back. It came back. I hoped it would come back, and it did. I saw this earlier and I was like, I just love this. Okay. If it were not for hope, the heart would break.
Thank you, Krista.
You're welcome. And thank you, somebody 300 years ago, for saying that.
Thank you, somebody 300 years ago also. Jessica, any final words of hope tonight?
Yes, just encouragement that you got to see a community that's active, living, breathing, lived experience, clinicians, people that won't leave the brave OCD community alone. And thank you, Katie, for the invite. A true pleasure. And Krista, I've seen you speak before, so it's an honor to be on, on a panel with you tonight. So thank you
You
so
are
much for the
fun.
opportunity.
We
Yeah.
have to do a presentation sometime because I feel like we have the same energy.
We will.
Y'all do.
So
I was really, when we were looking at guests for this first one, it was like, oh, this is so perfect. Oh, I was very excited.
we'll
So
be feeling for sure. Yes, I really enjoy being a part of this tonight.
This was
Same.
awesome. Well, thank you to Krista and Jessica, and thank you everyone here in the chat for joining us for the first of many OCD 101 Back to the Basics. Just a reminder that the IOCDF is a donor-supported nonprofit organization. So if you found this live stream helpful, please consider making a donation at iocdf.org/donate. Your support helps provide resources, education, and research for those affected by OCD and related disorders, and continues to offer support for programming like this so we can keep connecting in this beautiful space. Also want to tell you to mark your calendars because we want to hang out with y'all in Chicago at the 30th annual conference from July 11th to 13th. So we will all be there. We hope to see you there. Can't wait to meet you, all of the things. And again, just on a serious note, thank y'all so much for watching, for the great questions, and just for being here. You can continue to find resources and help at iocdf.org. And we want you to know that you're not alone, and that you are amazing and brave just for showing up here tonight. And we're so honored to be on the journey with you. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.